Welcome to Craving the Heat, where desire takes the lead and every story leaves you wanting more. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments and keep up with our latest naughty stories. The invitation had been casual, almost offhand. My cousin Jessica had asked if her son, Liam, could stay at my place for a night while he was passing through town. Liam was 25, recently graduated and trying to find his footing in the world. I hadn't seen him in years, but I remembered him as quiet, thoughtful, and more than a little charming. When he arrived late that evening, the air was thick with the first hints of spring. Liam was tired from the road, his dark hair tousled, and there was a softness in his eyes that didn't match the confident way he carried himself. We greeted each other with polite hugs, the kind that hold a mixture of family familiarity and the subtle awkwardness of adults trying to reconnect. After time apart, I made him tea in the kitchen while he unpacked a small bag in the guest room. The house smelled faintly of lavender and old books, a combination that always made me feel safe and calm. We talked about small things, how Jessica was doing, what Liam was planning next, the weather, but beneath the surface, I sensed a quiet tension, an unspoken curiosity hanging in the air. I was married to Mark, my husband of 7 years, but our marriage had slipped into a routine that left me restless. Mark was a good man, kind and steady, but the spark between us had dulled, worn away by years of obligations, work, and unshared dreams. Liam's visit was supposed to be just a blip, a brief convenience for family, but it quickly became something else. That night, after dinner, we found ourselves sitting on the couch in the living room, the flickering light from the fireplace, casting long shadows around us. Liam talked about his struggles finding a job, his doubts about moving back home, and I listened, surprised at how open and vulnerable he was. There was a depth to him, a yearning that reminded me of my own younger self. I felt my heart stir in ways I hadn't expected. The way he looked at me when I spoke, the slight hesitation before he smiled, the careful way he chose his words, it all pulled me in, igniting a quiet flame that I tried to ignore, but COULD single quotes T dot as the night deepened. The space between us felt charged. When Liam reached for a blanket and pulled it around his shoulders, our hands brushed. It was accidental, but the electricity of that touch sent a thrill through me that made me catch my breath. I looked at him, really looked, and saw not the boy I remembered, but a man standing before me, uncertain, aching, and somehow achingly familiar. The air grew heavy with unspoken desires. I knew it was dangerous, foolish even, but the distance in my marriage had left a void, and Liam's presence was a balm I hadn't realized I needed. There was an intimacy in the room that wasn't born of blood or family, but of shared loneliness and longing. When he stood to leave the room, our eyes met and everything shifted. There was a softness in his gaze that invited confession, a silent question lingering in the space between us. My hands trembled slightly as I reached out, unsure whether to close the distance or step back. Before I could think better of it, Liam stepped closer, his voice low and hesitant. "I know this is wrong," he said, "but I don't want this night to end like it always does." I wanted to say no, to remind him and myself of the boundaries that shouldn't be crossed. But my body betrayed me, leaning into his warmth, craving the connection that had become so rare in my life. His hand found mine again, this time with purpose, fingers intertwining as if trying to anchor us both in the moment. Our breaths mingled, and when his lips brushed mine, it was gentle at first, a tentative question, before growing into something deeper, urgent, and filled with all the frustration and desire we'd both been holding back. The kiss broke down years of restraint. Each touch a confession, each sigh an admission of everything we'd left unsaid. It was a reckless moment, a collision of youth and experience, longing and regret. I knew it could never last, that it was a flame flickering dangerously close to something that could burn us both. But in that moment, none of that mattered. We moved together slowly, exploring a passion that was as much about connection as it was about desire. His hands were careful, reverent, as if trying to memorize every curve, every nuance. I felt alive in a way I hadn't in years. my skin tingling with the electric charge of stolen moments and secret truths. When it was over, we lay tangled together in the quiet darkness, the world outside forgotten. Liam's fingers traced idle patterns on my skin, his breath steadying as if afraid to break the fragile spell between us. I knew the morning would bring reality crashing down. The guilt, the questions, the impossible choices. But for now, there was only this, sleep. Came in fits and starts, the weight of what we'd done settling over me like a dense fog. I watched him as he slept. The soft rise and fall of his chest, the peacefulness on his face, and my heart ached with a confusing mix of tenderness and sorrow. When dawn finally broke, painting the sky in pale pinks and golds, Liam was already awake, quietly packing his bag. We shared a breakfast heavy with silence, the taste of coffee bitter on my tongue. Words felt inadequate, the truth too complex for casual conversation. As he prepared to leave, I held his gaze, searching for answers neither of us had. What happens now? I asked quietly. He shook his head, a sad smile touching his lips. I don't know, but I'm glad I came. I needed to see you, to remember. I nodded, the sting of tears threatening to spill. Me too. He left shortly after, stepping into the fresh morning light with a hesitant wave. The door closing behind him sounded like a final punctuation mark, but in my chest, a question lingered, a restless ache that refused to be quieted. The days that followed were filled with stolen glances and restless thoughts. I loved Mark, but that night with Liam had opened a door I hadn't known was closed so tightly. The spark of passion, the raw vulnerability, the feeling of truly being seen, it haunted me. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for certain. Sometimes the most unexpected nights could change everything. In the days after Liam's visit, the house felt quieter than usual, as if it too was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I moved through my routine with a strange numbness, my thoughts tangled in memories of that night. The taste of his kiss lingered like a secret on my lips, and the warmth of his touch haunted the edges of my skin. Mark noticed. He always noticed when something was off, but I couldn't find the words to explain the storm inside me. I told myself it was just stress, work piling up, the pressures of family life. But deep down, I knew it was something else entirely. One evening, Mark came home earlier than usual. The faint scent of his cologne filled the air, mingling with the smell of dinner simmering on the stove. He wrapped his arms around me from behind, and I wanted to melt into him to find comfort in his familiar warmth. But instead I stiffened, feeling the ghost of Liam's touch like a shadow between us. I feel like you're somewhere else, Mark said softly, resting his chin on my shoulder. I swallowed hard, fighting the urge to confess everything. Just tired, I murmured. He pulled back slightly, searching my eyes. You can tell me anything. The truth pressed at my lips, but I pushed it down, burying it beneath years of promises and half-truths. I wanted to protect Mark from the pain I was carrying, but I also knew that secrets like this had a way of unraveling everything. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling while Mark slept beside me. The weight of what I'd done with Liam felt heavier now, tangled with guilt and longing. I kept replaying every moment, the way Liam's eyes had searched mine, the softness of his hands, the desperate tenderness in his kiss. I wondered if he felt it too, if he was as torn as I was. A week passed, and then another. Liam called once, his voice low and hesitant on the other end of the line. We spoke carefully, skirting around the edges of what had happened, trying to find footing. In a landscape that was shifting beneath us, I shouldn't have stayed that night. He said quietly, but you did, I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. There was a pause, filled with all the things neither of us dared say. I keep thinking about what it would have been like if things were different, he said. Finally, me too, I admitted, feeling tears prick at my eyes. The conversation ended with no promises, no plans, just a fragile understanding that whatever this was, it wasn't finished, Around the same time, Mark began to sense the distance between us growing. One afternoon, as I sat curled up with a book, he came and sat beside me, taking my hand in his. "Is there someone else?" he asked, his voice breaking with vulnerability. I hesitated, the truth weighing heavily on my chest. I wanted to be honest, but the fear of hurting him, of destroying the life we built, held me back. "No," I said, but even to my own ears, the words sounded hollow. He nodded slowly, but the hurt in his eyes told me he wasn't convinced. Days turned into restless nights. I found myself walking the line between loyalty and desire, between the past and the present, between love and regret. The tension inside me grew unbearable. Then one rainy evening, Liam showed up at the door again. This time there was no hesitation. In his eyes, only a raw need that matched my own. We didn't speak much. The silence between us was filled with everything we'd left unsaid. I invited him in, my heart pounding like a wild drum dot in the dim light of the living room. He reached. For me, his touch both gentle and urgent. Our lips met in a kiss that was fierce and tender all at once, a release of months of longing and pain. As the rain beat against the windows, we gave in to the passion that had simmered beneath the surface. It was reckless, it was wrong, but it was the only thing that felt real. Afterwards, as we lay tangled together, I realized that the boundaries I once believed in had blurred beyond recognition. The safe life I thought I wanted was slipping away. Replaced by something uncertain and wild. The next morning, Mark found a note. Not a confession, but a goodbye. A promise that I needed to figure out who I was, what I wanted, and whether there was still a place for us. It broke my heart to see the pain in his eyes, but it also freed me to confront the truth I'd been avoiding. Liam and I didn't know what the future held. We only knew that some nights changed everything, that sometimes love came wrapped in complicated, messy moments, and that the hardest journeys were the ones that led back to yourself. The days that followed Mark's discovery were some of the hardest I'd ever faced. The note I left wasn't a full explanation. I wasn't ready for that kind of honesty yet. Instead, it was a quiet plea for space, a hope that time might bring clarity to the chaos inside me. Mark didn't leave. He stayed, but the warmth between us was replaced by a cold distance that neither of us knew how to bridge. Every glance carried the weight of betrayal. Every silence was charged with unspoken hurt. I found myself caught between two worlds. The life I had built with Mark, the man who had been my partner through so many years, and the sudden, overwhelming flood of feelings that Liam had reignited inside me. One afternoon, I sat alone on the porch, the late summer sun filtering through the leaves. My phone buzzed with a message. It was Liam. "I can't stop thinking about you. I don't want to lose you again." The words made my heart ache. I wanted to reply, to tell him I felt the same, but fear clenched my throat. Instead, I typed back slowly, "We need to be careful. This can't destroy what's left." He responded quickly, "I am willing to risk everything if it means being with you." That was the truth that scared me the most, the undeniable pull between us that refused to be ignored. Mark tried to talk to me that night. We sat across from each other at the kitchen table, the air thick with tension. "I don't want to lose you," he said, voice barely steady. "But I don't know if I can fix this." Tears welled up in my eyes. "Neither do I." The honesty was painful, but necessary. In the weeks that followed, I met Liam in secret in quiet cafes and hidden corners of the city. Every moment with him was electric, filled with passion, laughter, and the kind of deep connection I hadn't realized I was missing. But those moments were also shadows, a fragile, dangerous dance on the edge of something that could shatter us all. One rainy evening, as the city lights blurred through the window, Liam took my hands in his. "I want to build something real with you," he said, voice low and intense. "No more hiding." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that love could conquer everything. But I also knew that the road ahead would be filled with heartbreak. The next day, I sat down with Mark. We talked, really talked, for the first time in months. We lay bare our fears, our regrets, our hopes. I don't know if we can fix this, I said, but I want to try. For us. For Evan. Mark nodded slowly. Me too. It wasn't a promise of happily ever after. It was a commitment to face the pain, to heal, and to rediscover what had brought us together in the first place. As for Liam, I told him the truth. I couldn't be with him. Not now, not while. I still had a family to protect. He understood, but it didn't make the goodbye any easier. Standing at the train station as he left, I felt the weight of every choice I'd made. The mistakes, the longings, the love. Life was messy. Love was complicated. But in the end, I hoped that honesty and courage could lead me back to a place of peace. The weeks that followed were a blur of stolen glances, tense conversations, and sleepless nights. Mark and I were living under the same roof, yet it felt as if a chasm had opened between us, one neither of us knew how to cross. Every time I looked at him, I saw both the man I loved and the stranger who had been hurt by my betrayal. His eyes held a cautious sadness, as if searching for a way to trust me again, but unsure whether he could. I wanted to bridge that gap, but the guilt weighed heavy on my chest, clouding my every word and touch. I would find myself hesitating when he reached out, afraid that I might shatter what little connection remained. Meanwhile, Liam's messages continued to arrive, soft and insistent. He was patient, understanding the slow pace at which I moved. His words became a lifeline, reminders of a passion and excitement I hadn't felt in years. Sometimes, when the house was quiet and Mark was away on business, I would let myself dream of what life might be like if I chose differently, but those dreams always collided with reality. I was a mother now, a wife bound by vows and memories. I thought of Evan, our little boy whose laughter filled the hallways and whose innocent eyes watched the world without suspicion. How could I explain any of this to him? How could I justify the fractures in the family he depended on? One evening, after putting Evan to bed, Mark and I sat in the living room, the glow of the fireplace casting flickering shadows on the walls. The silence stretched long before he finally spoke. I don't want to lose what we have, he said quietly. I know things aren't perfect and maybe they never will be, but I'm willing to fight for us. His words hit me harder than I expected. I looked at him, really looked at him, the man who had stood by me through joy and hardship, the father of my child, my partner in this complicated journey. I want that too, I whispered, my voice trembling, but I don't know if I'm strong enough. He reached out, taking my hand in his. It was a small gesture, but it carried the weight of years. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of hope that we began to talk more openly, sharing our fears and regrets, slowly rebuilding trust one conversation at a time. It wasn't easy. There were tears and raised voices, moments when the past seemed too heavy to carry. But there were also moments of tenderness, quiet mornings, sipping coffee together, Evan's small hands slipping into mine, laughter shared over silly jokes. As for Liam, I knew I had to close that chapter. The goodbye was bittersweet, filled with tears and promises that we'd both find happiness, even if it wasn't with each other. He left with a lingering kiss and a quiet thank you that stayed with me long after he was gone. In the months that followed, I focused on healing, on mending the fragile threads that tied me to Mark and rebuilding the family I cherished. It wasn't perfect. Some nights, loneliness crept in, and doubts whispered in the quiet. But slowly, we found our way back not to what we were, but to something new. A love tempered by hardship, deepened by forgiveness, and strengthened by the courage to keep trying. As I watched Evan grow, laughing and exploring the world with wide eyes, I knew that love, in all its messy, complicated forms, was worth fighting for. After that quiet night by the fireplace, things didn't suddenly become perfect. If anything, the road ahead was more uncertain than ever. But for the first time, Mark and I were walking it together, no longer silent strangers sharing a home, but two people trying to rebuild the bridge we'd let crumble. Days blurred into weeks. We began scheduling small rituals that felt foreign, but necessary. A coffee date after Evan's bedtime, A weekend walk in the park, just the three of us. Little moments to remind ourselves we were still a family, even if fragile. Mark was patient but reserved. I could see the walls he'd built, brick by brick, around his heart. Sometimes when Evan wasn't around, he'd sit across from me, his eyes searching for the right words, struggling to articulate the mix of hurt, confusion, and lingering love he felt. One evening, after Evan had fallen asleep, Mark surprised me by pulling out an old photo album. It was filled with pictures from our early years, smiling faces at beach trips, awkward prom poses, the day Evan was born. We spent hours flipping through the pages, laughing at memories long past, tears quietly tracing down our cheeks. That was a good time, Mark said softly. It still can be, I replied, unsure if I truly believed it. He reached out and took my hand in his. This time, there was no hesitation. The days that followed brought subtle changes. Mark started to open up more about his own struggles, the long hours at work, the loneliness he'd felt when I was emotionally distant. I shared my fears, the guilt that gnawed at me every time I looked at Evan, wondering if I damaged the family beyond repair. And then there was Liam and my secret that refused to stay buried. I hadn't spoken to him since that final goodbye, but his presence lingered like a shadow. One afternoon when Mark was out of town on business, my phone buzzed. The screen showed Liam's name. My heart hammered in my chest as I debated whether to answer. I finally did. Hello? I whispered. Hey. His voice was calm, steady. I just wanted to check in. Make sure you're okay. I paused, swallowing the lump in my throat. I'm managing, I said. There was a silence on the other end. I miss you, he said quietly. Tears pricked at my eyes. I miss you too, I admitted, but I have to move forward. For Evan, for Mark. I understand, he said. I want you to be happy, truly happy, even if it's not with me. That conversation felt like a closing chapter, but also a bittersweet reminder of everything that had almost been and almost lost. Meanwhile, Mark came home early one evening, unexpected but welcome. Evan ran to him, his small arms wrapped tightly around his father's legs. I watched the scene with a pang in my chest. A family, imperfect but still together. Later, Mark and I sat quietly in the living room. I reached for his hand, the familiar warmth settling around me. I want to try again, I said, voice steady. He nodded, squeezing my hand gently. Me too. We agreed on counseling not as a last resort, but as a tool to help us understand each other better. The sessions were tough. Emotions spilled out, raw and unfiltered. But each session peeled back layers of pain, uncovering the love buried beneath resentment. Slowly, the distance between us lessened. Our conversations became more honest, our touches more frequent. I noticed Mark watching me with a new tenderness, like rediscovering a favorite book long forgotten. Evan thrived in the renewed warmth. His laughter filled the house again, contagious and bright. Watching him grow reminded me daily of what was at stake and what was worth fighting for. There were setbacks, moments when doubt crept in, when the past threatened to pull us under. But we faced them together. One rainy night, much like the one when Noah had unexpectedly come back into my life, Mark pulled me close, his arms steady around my waist. I love you, he said simply. I love you too, I whispered back, feeling the truth in those words more deeply than ever. The path wasn't perfect, and maybe it never would be. But love, real love, wasn't about perfection. It was about holding on through storms, weathering the silence, and choosing each other every single day. And in that choice, we found hope. The days turned slower as the walls between us crumbled. Not all at once, but in quiet moments that caught me off guard. It wasn't just the laughter returning or the smiles that had been absent for so long. It was the spark, the electricity between us, reigniting with a subtle but undeniable heat. One evening, after Evan was asleep, Mark and I found ourselves lingering in the living room, the dim glow of the lamp casting soft shadows across his face. He reached out, his fingers brushing a stray lock of hair from my cheek. His touch lingering like a question. Without thinking, I leaned into his hand, craving the warmth it promised. Our eyes locked, searching and hungry. He didn't say a word as he pulled me closer, the air thick with everything we hadn't dared to say. When his lips finally met mine, it was slow at first, tentative, but beneath that hesitation was a fierce longing that spoke volumes. The kiss deepened, hands exploring familiar territory yet feeling new, as if discovering a secret language only we could understand. Mark's touch was both tender and urgent. His hands slid down my back, pulling me flush against him. I could feel the steady beat of his heart against my chest, matching the quickening rhythm of my own. Every breath we took mingled, every sigh and murmur a silent confession. In that moment, the past, the mistakes, the regrets faded into nothingness. There was only us, raw and unfiltered, rediscovering the kind of love that set skin on fire and left you breathless. He broke the kiss just long enough to whisper against my lips, "I've wanted this for so long. I've wanted you," I admitted, my voice trembling with the weight of truth. His hands traced down my sides, fingertips igniting sparks wherever they touched. The air around us seemed to hum with the promise of more closeness, more passion, more the kind of connection that no words could capture. We moved together slowly, savoring the softness of each other's skin, the way our bodies fit after. Years apart. Every touch was an apology, every kiss a promise that we were choosing this moment, this love, over the shadows of yesterday. As Mark's hand slid beneath the fabric of my shirt, the heat between us intensified, a blazing contrast to the cool night air pressing against the windows. I arched into him, the ache of longing that had built over time pouring out in a rush of need. Our whispered names and urgent breaths filled the quiet house, echoing through the rooms that had once felt empty and cold. It wasn't just physical, it was a reunion of souls, a passionate reclaiming of what had always belonged to us. Afterwards, wrapped in the soft glow of the moonlight spilling through the curtains, Mark held me close, fingers tracing lazy patterns along my back. The silence between us was full, not empty, with a tenderness that promised this was only the beginning. "I don't want to lose this," he murmured. "Neither do I said, my heart swelling with a fierce kind of hope. That night, passion became our language, healing wounds words could never reach. It was messy, real, and imperfect, but utterly ours. And in the warmth of his arms, I finally believed that love could be both steady and wild, quiet and fierce, a beautiful contradiction, worth fighting for. In the days that followed, everything felt different, charged with a new energy I hadn't realized I was missing. Mark and I moved carefully, aware of the fragile line we were walking, but unable to deny the depth of what had been rekindled. I knew I couldn't keep living in shadows or pretending the past hadn't changed me. My marriage with Daniel was no longer the quiet, steady partnership it had been. It felt like a door closing gently, but inevitably. There were conversations to be had, painful ones, honest ones that I owed to myself and to everyone involved. One evening after Evan was asleep, I sat down with Daniel. I told him everything. The loneliness, the distance, the way I had drifted without even realizing it. It wasn't easy. There were tears, silence, and broken pieces, but it was real. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was being honest with myself. Mark wasn't just a fleeting spark. He was a reminder of who I was underneath the weight of routine and compromise. With him, I felt alive again. The decision wasn't simple or clean. There were hard days, tangled emotions, and uncertain futures. But I chose to follow my heart, to seek a love that was passionate, real, and reciprocated. One quiet morning, as sunlight spilled across the kitchen table, Mark and I sat with Evan between us, sharing laughter and stories. It was imperfect, complicated, but beautiful. We were weaving a new chapter, one filled with hope, honesty, and the kind of love that sets your soul on fire. No matter what came next, I knew I was finally living my truth.